I'd like to read from my text tonight from the book of Daniel, chapter 6, verses 25 through 27. Daniel chapter 6, starting at verse 25. Then King Darius wrote unto all people, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, Peace be multiplied unto you. I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom men tremble and fear before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God, and steadfast forever, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall be even unto the end. He delivereth and rescueth, and he worketh signs and wonders in heaven and earth, who hath delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. So tonight I'm going to ask ourselves a question. I've asked it before, but it's good for us to remind ourselves all the time. And the questions are, who are you? Who am I serving? What are you? What am I trusting in? So this account for my text here is the conclusion of after Daniel was thrown in the lion's den for standing up against the scheme of the ones that were trying to take him down, which we'll get into that a little more later. But it's interesting, this decree from Darius, which I don't see any indication before this that he was a godly man. He'd taken over after the fall of Babylon, and he was in charge. Yet after this miracle that God performed for Daniel, he says, I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom men tremble and fear before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God, and steadfast forever, and his kingdom which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall be even unto the end. I'm glad that we are serving a living God, one that is alive, the one whose ears are open to our prayers. It tells us that Jesus, the Son of God, which came to this earth, died on that old rugged cross, shed his innocent blood to pay the price for the sin of humanity. Then he rose again 3 days later, but it tells us that now, even tonight, he's at the right hand of his Father, the throne of glory, where he makes intercession for you and for me. That's the God I'm talking about. Not just some man that lived a life and people honored him as a God, or people make up you're your own God. I mean, the things people come up with. The bottom line is, when God breathed into Adam's nostrils the breath of life, and he became a living soul, and everyone born from that time on has a living soul. There is something in every individual that needs God. Yeah. And when you don't serve the living God, the true God, the creator God, then you put somebody else in place of that. But the God we want to focus on tonight is Daniel's God, the living God. Amen. He can be reached now. He's not a God afar off, like in Elijah's time when those prophets of Baal he said, you guys go first, make intercession to your God. The one that answers by fire, he'll be the true God. And they danced around and cut themselves and nothing happened. Elijah kind of egged him on and said, well, maybe he's on vacation, maybe he's taking a trip, maybe he's asleep, you need to wake him up. And they go, they had enthusiasm. There was no lack of their allegiance to Baal, but nothing happened. But Elijah, when it was his turn, he had that altar arranged, those 12 stones, put on the wood on there, the sacrifice on there, had water dumped over it so the people would know that there was no sleight of hand, no tricks involved here, that they knew that if a God answered by fire, it was a miracle. Elijah prayed that simple prayer, and his objective was that these people would know that there is a true and a living God. And God heard his prayer, and he answered by fire, and the fire came down, consumed the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, licked up the water in the trench. That's the God I'm talking about. Says he's steadfast forever. And this word in this setting means permanent, sure. He is the living God, steadfast, permanent, sure, forever. And his kingdom which shall not be destroyed. Kings, presidents, rulers come and go through the centuries. From the Babylonian Empire even until now. But the God that we serve, his dominion, his kingdom will never be destroyed. It shall be even unto the end. You know, this whole book of Daniel, probably a lot of you maybe been reading in this as well with the devotions and stuff, and it's very good. But Daniel, as this book starts out, we find out he's taken captive from the land of Israel. Him and other young men that were well looked upon and talented and smart. They took the best, and King Nebuchadnezzar wanted to train those to be assets to him and his kingdom. For Nebuchadnezzar was the ruler of the Babylonian Empire, the ruler of the world. Most likely they were young teenagers. Daniel, his three friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Right from the start, they took a stand. They were offered the king's meat and the wine which he drank, and according to their convictions and what they'd been taught, they were taught not to eat anything that was offered to idols. And so they purposed in their heart that they would not defile themselves with the king's meat or the portion of the wine which he drank. And they went to the man in charge of them and requested they could have just like vegetables and water, something very bland, nothing you would look on and say it was good, but they said we would prefer this. Right. The man was concerned because he says, if the king finds out that I didn't feed you what he instructed and you look more frail and don't look good, well, Nebuchadnezzar, he was the kind of guy that just said, into you. Well, said, just try us. Just for a short time, just try it. At the end of that time, God showed favor for their stand for him, and they were healthier and smarter than all the other ones. At the end of their schooling, the same thing, God blessed them and honored them, and they came out top of the class. Well, not too long after that, I don't know the exact timing, but King Nebuchadnezzar had a dream. And he went to all his astrologers and wise men and magicians and all the men that were supposed to know everything, and he says, I had a dream. I need you to tell me the dream and tell me the interpretation thereof. I said, fine, tell us the dream and we'll tell you the interpretation. He said, no, you tell me the dream and then tell me the interpretation. He said, there's not a man on the earth that can tell you your dream. Tell us the dream, then we'll tell you what it's about. He says, no, if I tell you the dream, then you'll come up with something, and I don't know if you're right or not. Well, like I said, the way Nebuchadnezzar was, fine, kill them all. Done. Kill all my wise men, magicians. Daniel hears about it because he was now in that group, even though he wasn't, maybe at the top at that point. Says, why are we going to be executed? Well, king had a dream. Nobody could tell him his dream, and so said to kill you all. Well, Daniel said, just give me a little time. Just shows you the God Daniel was serving. Not just some God, not just something out there you pray to and you hope something happens. No, the living God, the true God, the everlasting God. Daniel went to his friends. So many words he says, we got to pray about something. We're to be executed along with all the other wise men unless God will give me that dream and the meaning of it. Well, I'm sure they knew how to pray. As we know, as the book of Daniel goes on, and how he prayed, he had a habit of it every day. Chapter 2 of Daniel, verses 16 through 18. Then Daniel went in and desired of the king that he would give him time and that he would show the king the interpretation. Then Daniel went to his house and made the thing known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions, that they would desire mercies of the God of heaven concerning this secret, that Daniel and his fellows should not perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. It continues with God answering their prayer. Verse 19, then was the secret revealed unto Daniel in a night vision, and this was Daniel's response. Daniel blessed the God of heaven. Daniel answered and said, blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his. And he changeth the times and the season. He removeth kings and setteth up kings. He giveth wisdom unto the wise and knowledge to them that know understanding. He revealeth the deep and secret things. He knoweth what is in the darkness, and the light dwelleth with him. I thank thee and praise thee, O thou God of my fathers, who hast given me wisdom and might, and hast made known unto me now what we desire of thee, for thou hast made known unto us the king's matter. God, the living God we're talking about, performed a miracle to give Daniel what that dream was, and then the interpretation. And this here is Daniel verse 28, when he came before the king now and said, okay, I'm going to tell you your dream and the interpretation. This is what Daniel said. He didn't say, I'm a very wise man, and I figured this out, so here's your dream. No, Daniel always gave honor to the God of heaven, the living God. And verse 28 tells us here, but there is a God in heaven that revealeth secrets and maketh known to the king Nebuchadnezzar what shall be in the latter days. Daniel consistently, from the day he arrived, and we know before he arrived as a captive in Babylon, he had something down in his heart that trusted in the living God, and he always honored God. And so when he was brought before King Nebuchadnezzar, he said, God hath revealed this to me, the God of heaven. He proceeds to tell Nebuchadnezzar what his dream was, what the interpretation was, and this is Nebuchadnezzar's responses, verses 46 through 48. Then the king Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face and worshiped Daniel and commanded
that they should offer an oblation and sweet odors unto him. The king answered unto Daniel and said, of a truth it is that your God is a God of gods and the Lord of kings, and a revealer of secrets, seeing thou couldst reveal this secret. Then the king made Daniel a great man and gave him many great gifts and made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon. That wasn't Daniel's goal. That was the results just of his standing up for God. But it's so amazing to me, and we're going to touch on a few more things through this book of Daniel, how God used a man that believed in him, that trusted in him, that gave honor to him, that refused to compromise with the society he was in, and how God used him to reach the ruler of the Babylonian Empire. That is absolutely incredible. I mean, Nebuchadnezzar had conquered everything. He had control over everything. And yet God uses a godly young man, Daniel, and his 3 friends to speak to him and prove that there is a God in heaven which hears and answers prayer. Next account in the book of Daniel is about when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego faces the fiery furnace because King Nebuchadnezzar, with all his pride and desire to be honored, created this huge statue and said, at this certain time, everybody's going to fall down and worship my statue. He was a very ungodly, proud man. And as I already referred to, I mean, it meant nothing just to say, off with your head, done, gone, it's over. And so this way, instead of just killing them in some maybe more, if there's any kind way to kill someone, he said, this time, if you don't do what I say, I'm going to throw you in a fiery furnace. That don't sound like a very fun way to die. Well, once again, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they had purposed in their heart right from the get-go, along with Daniel, they weren't going to compromise. And I know I've preached on this how many times, I've read it how many times, but it just thrills me every single time when they're brought before the king, they were accused because they didn't bow down, and the king said, you know what, I'm going to give you another chance. And they said, don't bother, we're not going to bow, even if you give us another chance. For the God whom we serve, the living God, the true God, the everlasting God, the God in heaven, the creator of heaven and earth, the God we serve is able to deliver us. And even if he doesn't deliver us, we're still not going to bow down to your image. You know, we have the blessing of reading the beginning of the story, the middle of the story, the end of the story. Oh, it's a great story. I mean, some of us that were raised in Christian homes, this is one of the Bible stories we heard from a child. But think about it in the middle of it. If we place ourselves in the middle of this situation where Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are standing before Nebuchadnezzar, and it's one decision away from the end of our life, and do we have enough faith and the trust in the God that we're serving that we can say, even if I die, I am not bowing down? Like Queen Esther, when she was faced with that, said, if I perish, I perish. Same determination. Well, that didn't make Nebuchadnezzar happy. He was full of rage. He was mad. Commands this furnace to be heated 7 times hotter than it was supposed to be, gets the mightiest men in his army to bind them, and throws them into the fiery furnace. It was arranged in such a manner that he could look in there, because it tells you that Nebuchadnezzar's looking on the whole scene as this takes place. He sees his mighty soldiers throwing them into this furnace that's so hot, 7 times hotter than it's supposed to be. And immediately they're slain from the heat. And then he looks in this furnace and he sees 3 walking around. Oh, no, it's not 3, there's 4 walking around. And the 4th, he says, is like unto the Son of God. And how did he come up with that? Jesus said, I'll never leave you nor forsake you. He didn't forsake them. They're just walking around, and finally Nebuchadnezzar says, take him out. Here again, God's working on Nebuchadnezzar, the king, the ruler of the world, the Babylonian Empire. Chapter 3, verse 28, then Nebuchadnezzar spake and said, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants that trusted in him, and have changed the king's word, and yielded their bodies that they might not serve nor worship any god except their own God. Well, they were serving the living God. There's only one true God. It doesn't matter what society says, or whether it's back in that day or even today, all the things they come up with, there's one God. There's one way to heaven. That's through repentance, through Jesus Christ. There's only one true God. Every other god that people put in place of the true God will fail them. You know, Nebuchadnezzar ends up having another dream. God reveals this dream to Daniel once again, and it wasn't a pretty message. Yet Nebuchadnezzar, after he exhausted his other resources, called for Daniel and says, okay, what's the dream? Daniel didn't really want to tell him because it wasn't very good. That because of Nebuchadnezzar's pride that he was going to live like an animal for 7 years, and his kingdom would be taken away from him. But Daniel told him just like it was. And then verse 16 of chapter 6, we'll go back still before that. $427, I believe is what it is. I know it's in here. Wherefore, O king, let my countenance be acceptable unto thee, and break off thy sins by righteousness, and thine iniquities by showing mercy to the poor, if it may be a lengthening of thy tranquility. So at the conclusion of what Daniel told him about his dream, he warned him and said, you need to basically repent and do the right thing here. Maybe God will spare you. But a year later, Nebuchadnezzar's walking through his palace and everything. Oh, look, this great Babylon that I created, and that. He was driven from men, lived like an animal for 7 years. But this is the amazing thing, how God got a hold of this wicked king, the ruler of the world. And this is his response. At the end, verse 34 of chapter 4, and at the end of the days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted up mine eyes unto heaven, and mine understanding returned unto me, and I blessed the Most High, and I praised and honored him that liveth forever, whose dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom from generation to generation. And all the inhabitants of the earth are reputed as nothing, and he doeth according to his will in the army of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth, and none can stay his hand or say unto him, What doest thou? At the same time my reason returned unto me, for the glory of my kingdom, mine honor and brightness returned unto me, and my counselors and my Lord sought unto me, and I was established in my kingdom, and the excellency majesty was added unto me. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven, all whose words are truth and his ways judgment, and those that walk in pride he is able to to a base. So we see that through Daniel and his three friends and their trust in the living God, how God reached this wicked man and caused him to come to a place of repentance and honor the true and living God. In conclusion, my text tonight is after Belshazzar had taken over and the writing on the wall and says your days are numbered and basically tonight it's over for you. And then the Medes and the Persians came in, and that was the end of the Babylonian Empire. And then the account that I read was this King Darius, and how these, it's amazing how every single king honored Daniel. It's like, and him's the living God, and him's the one that can do these things, and Daniel always gave God the credit. So Darius, this king now, promoted Daniel. And the other ones under him were jealous, and they came up with this scheme to through corruption to trick the king into signing a decree that nobody can make a petition of any god or man for 30 days. Once again, here Daniel's probably in his 80s, older man. And yet he'd purpose in his heart clear back then that he wouldn't defile himself with a portion of the king's meat. All the way through his life, he had that allegiance to his God. Says that he opened his windows 3 times a day, prayed on his knees towards Jerusalem. The men were waiting, see if Daniel would do it again. Daniel didn't waver to compromise. He prayed as he did aforetime. He was taken before the king. The king did everything he could to deliver Daniel where he wouldn't have to go in that lion's den, because he liked Daniel. He realized he was tricked. But they had to throw him in there. That night that king couldn't sleep. He couldn't eat. He was so just distraught. His response right before he threw him in is just his trust in Daniel's God, even though it don't give me any indication that he trusted in Daniel's God. But verse 16 of that 6th chapter says, Then the king commanded, and they brought Daniel and cast him into the den of lions. Now the king spake unto Daniel and said, Thy God, whom thou servest continually, he will deliver thee. He had faith in Daniel's God, just through Daniel's example. And that next morning when he came down there, he said in that lamentable voice, O Daniel, is a God whom thou servest continue able to deliver thee? And Daniel says, My God hath sent an angel and hath shut the lions' mouths and have not hurt me. After this, King Darius witnessed this. It's what I read in my text. That all people, nations, languages, the whole earth, that they would know that there is a true and a living God. Verse 26 and 27 again, or just 26. I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom men tremble and fear before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God, and steadfast. Remember, permanent, sure, forever, and his kingdom which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion even unto the end. What a mighty God we serve. We serve a living God. The question tonight, is that who we're serving? Is that who we're trusting? In the troubled times that we're in, it's easy to me to look for another solution, but this God of Daniel is the one who will not let us down. He will come through for us. It says that he that endureth unto the end, the same shall be saved. Thank the Lord that we have such a wonderful Savior, a living God. Thank the Lord that Jesus, as I mentioned earlier, is at the right hand of the Father even tonight, making intercession for you and for me. So whatever your need is here tonight, we can come before the Lord, just lay it out before Him, and He's going to intercede, and He's going to help us because He's faithful. I'm going to sing a closing song, 727, invite you to come and pray.